What up? Bobby here from BrassReel Brothers, or BrassReel Bobby, as I've been trying to make cool or make that catch on. Thanks for tuning back in, or if this is your first time, this is Hot Fresh Popcorn, where I talk about movies old and new and the impact they had on me and the world and society in general. Our movie of this episode is Masters of the Universe.
Masters of the Universe.
Starring Dolph Lundgren and Courtney Cox, young Courtney Cox, in her Bruce Springsteen days, actually. Like I said, made in 1987, directed by Gary Goddard, and made by Cannon Films, but actually released and distributed by Warner Brothers. Now, Cannon Films, or Cannon Corp, as they like to call themselves, Cannon Corporation, Cannon Group, they were a low-budget film company that made movies in the 80s. They focused on really spending the least amount of money that they could and trying to kind of play with the big boys a little bit. They made a lot of movies starring Van Damme, Chuck Norris, Steven Seagal, Thomas Ian Griffith. They made a couple with Arnie and Stallone, but for the most part, they tried to pay actors that were sort of lower grade at the time that still could pull off, solid action movies though, and again they would pay really low budget to try to play in the big leagues a little bit. There's actually a really cool documentary called Electric Boogaloo, the wild untold story of Cannon Films. It's all about the two guys who started it, Dennis Friedman and Christopher C. Dewey. Again, these guys were two dudes that just had a dream of making movies in the industry and being in Hollywood, and so they would just try to make movies for next to nothing. But they would distribute them somehow, and they would get them out there somehow. A lot of them straight to video, and a lot of these movies I grew up with watching. I'm sure you did too, if you're from my age, from the 80s at all. You definitely saw some movies that were Cannon movies. Masters of the Universe was their first attempt to really try to play in the big leagues. And I want to say play in the big leagues, like they really tried to market this like crazy. They used a major IP like Masters of the Universe, He-Man. And they really tried to just go straight forward with it on the TVs, trailers. So even as a little kid, I knew that this movie was coming out. Now, if you watched my last review, you saw that I talked about Batman and how that movie influenced me like crazy. And all this, was my first real, true, awesome movie-going experience. And that is true still to this day. Like I said, it's not my favorite movie of all time, but it is my first memorable, influential movie-going experience. And it changed the way I viewed Batman forever. But before I really was able to get Batman completely and really understand, before I got to that obsession with Batman that I fully, arrived at and still am at today, I was into toys. I really wasn't into comics yet. I knew that Batman was out there, and I probably had a Batman toy here and there, but I was into all the other toys more like He-Man and Transformers and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The ones that actually ultimately made cartoons within the same year, I think, of the release of the toys. That was kind of the whole purpose of those toys, to release the toys and get those out and then put the cartoons out, and both would sell and market each other. So you watch the cartoons, the kids get addicted to that, and then they go buy the toys. And then if you see the toys at your friend's house and for some reason you watch a cartoon or vice versa, it just all worked in itself together. There's this huge marketing strategy that was very effective. If you were from the 80s, you had He-Man, Transformers, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. If you were a boy, probably some girls had it too, but anyway, so I was into that much more like hardcore before I was into the character of Batman. At this point, I just loved He-Man and the fictional nature of it, the fantasy nature of it. The same went for Transformers, and the same went for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Never was really into G.I. Joe as much as everybody else. I liked it enough, but they kind of say that you're a Elvis or a Roy Orbison fan, a Beatles or a Rolling Stones fan, Transformers or G.I. Joe fan. I was a Transformers fan. Star Wars, Star Trek, which I play in both of those fields, by the way. I don't care. I love it. So this movie was really big for me as far as probably the first big movie that I saw as a kid that I kind of cared about. But I don't remember it like I remembered Batman. I remember Batman to the and I remember that, it's funny, I don't even remember seeing this movie in the theater, but I remember like being at a place called Little Pal's Daycare. I grew up in Louisiana, in central Louisiana. And this daycare, it was after school that I was there. I think I went there during the day as well. But this was, my parents were getting off of work and they were coming to pick me up. So I remember waiting and the sun was going down, and I remember them picking me up and being like, we're going to go see He-Man, we're going to see He-Man. And I loved He-Man. And I was so obsessed with He-Man, in fact, that I actually, I had tubes in my ears multiple times growing up. I had chronic ear infections. And I'd had tubes in my ears as a kid. And it was, terrible surgery, painful surgery. When you wake up, your ears are just hurting like crazy. And my dad, I will never forget that he was waiting for me when I woke up with Battle Cat, He-Man's cat that he rode. It was like when he was Prince Adam, and he had this pet cat. It was a wuss. It was just like a big panther or something. And then when he said, I have the power by the power of Grayskull, then he changed, and not only he changed, but then he pointed the sword at Battle Cat, and then the electricity went to him, and then he turned and he had all this armor on and everything. It was awesome. And I remember my dad having that cat for me when I woke up to just make me feel better because I was in so much pain waking up. So I just remember things like that about He-Man. I had a ton of the toys. All my friends had the toys. We played with them like crazy. I knew what it looked like. I loved everything from Gwildor to Tila to Man-at-Arms to Karg to all the bad guys, Blade, Beastman. All of it was awesome. Skeletor, of course. And then we go see the movie, and I loved it because I was a kid, but it wasn't He-Man at all. It was a canon movie. And when I learned this a couple years later, once I started watching all these other more adult films like Van Damme movies and Chuck Norris movies and all that, I realized that this was a total canon production. One of the things is that I knew it even after a little while is from the start, from the very beginning, it's kind of He-Man-esque. It starts out on Grayskull, and that's it, and even if as cheap as the background looked, it still was making me feel like He-Man, and that was just like the opening scene. And then very soon they take it straight to Earth. I mean, and that just shows that they spent a lot of the money at the beginning and a lot of money at the end on the third act. In the middle of the movie, all the way through, they do the comic cartoon to live action movie trope, and do it like a fish out of water type deal where it's, oh, here we go, let's put He-Man on Earth. Because that's what we all want to see. That's what every one of us wants to see. When I was growing up watching He-Man, it's just like, you remember when He-Man was fighting in New York? I remember being like, this isn't He-Man, but I did love it. I did love every bit of it when I was growing up. Some of this stuff was very much like He-Man. Like Karg, Beastman, Blade, all the characters the creature-esque characters they made, all that definitely looked like He-Man. Skeletor?
I am not in the giving vein this day.
By Frank Langella. It's not that I dislike it, but it doesn't really work. And you can see the budget, them trying to stretch the budget, not only with him and his makeup, but with the set and a lot of the other costumes. There's this one little scene where they have when they're actually in Grayskull at the beginning of the movie. And they're only in Grayskull at the end of the movie. And when they're at the beginning of the movie, it has this sort of Darth Vader, Star Wars-esque feel, like it's stormtroopers all in black type feel running around. And they have the sorceress, which is, He-Man's mother. I think it's his mother. But the sorceress is like behind this force field. They don't have the effects to really create a force field. So occasionally there's like these flashes of light that kind of glimmer around her to kind of make you believe there's a force field there. And then they show some kind of smoke going up a little bit. But for the most part, you can see they spent most of their money stretching their money. Like they made an okay set that almost looked good, but it still kind of looked cheesy. They made an okay Skeletor that almost looked good, but he still kind of looked cheesy. Like I said, the Beastman and Karg, Blade, all those guys, they look pretty good. They look pretty much straight out of the comics, or out of the cartoon to the movie. But He-Man definitely didn't look like He-Man. He was, I don't know, looked like he was getting in the mood for something else. He was practically naked. I don't remember He-Man being into bondage. Do you guys? Hey, do you guys remember He-Man being into bondage? It just wasn't something that they needed to do. He-Man's, he was supposed to be buff, and when he went from Prince Adam, which that's another thing, they didn't show him, they showed him doing the I have the power. That happens when he transforms from Prince Adam to He-Man in the cartoon. This, he just does it when he gets his sword back after he's been taken into chains by all of Skeletor's men. Which doesn't really, the fighting is kind of cheesy. I mean, like, as a kid you're watching it, but it really doesn't make sense. It's just terrible choreography. They spend most of the money at the beginning and the end of the movie. And even then they have to stretch that really thin. But the middle part of the movie, they're just with Earthlings, basically. And I'll go through some of the cast real quick. You got Dolph Lundgren as He-Man. You got Frank Langella as Skeletor. You got Chelsea Field as Tila, Woman-at-Arms. You got Billy Barty as Gwildor, which is makeup the whole time. It's a huge prosthetic makeup mask and everything. They're even like trying to move his mouth with, what do they call it? Animatronics. But you got Courtney Cox as Julie, which is, I said, like her Bruce Springsteen days, her early role days, which, she's been around for a while and she's great in it. She's actually one of the good actresses or actors in the movie. There's also Detective Lubbock by James Tolkien. You all know that guy. We love him from Back to the Future. Slacker.
You've got a real attitude problem, McFly. You're a slacker.
That guy's great, and he plays the stereotypical role, basically the same role he's in Back to the Future, he plays in this movie. He plays this cop that he's full of one-liners.
Hey! Nobody takes pot shots at Lubbock! All right, Pico, you want to play games? Let's play!
He's just always negative, he's always getting in the way, he's annoying, he thinks he knows everything, but he's always mucking things up.
Somebody tell me what the hell's going on around here!
And just making a disaster of everything. You got Man-at-Arms, played by John Cypher. It was a pretty decent cast. I mean, they definitely pulled their money together as best they could to get this. But, when I'm sitting there thinking of Skeletor, I'm not thinking to myself, who'd be a great Skeletor? Frank Langella. No, nobody's saying that. Now, Dolph Lundgren, actually, that does make sense for He-Man because he's big, he was huge at the time. One of the things I do like is when they go to the high school, it does get kind of 80s horror-esque at that moment. It gets to definitely it gets bloody a little bit. They bloody up the coach. And it starts for a moment kind of having that quintessential 80s suburban horror movie feel to it. That's right, I said suburban horror movie because you get to see He-Man riding around in cars and convertibles. It definitely has some 80s horror-esque moments to it. Like I said, when they're in the gym.
I've got you pretty now!
No! Get away from me! Let go!
Get her! She's mine!
And they bloody up the coach and they just throw him around, Coach Carl. They make it kind of scary in moments. They really do, especially when Skeletor and the whole crew, when they warp and they bring all of his like flying tanks in and stuff like that, which they actually did a pretty good job of stretching the budget the way that they could have. I mean, that actually looks pretty good. One of the things about the movie also that really got to me as a kid was her having no parents. She talks about how her parents were died, and there's a little exposition of that in the beginning. And the way they describe it and the way it's conveyed in the movie is pretty sad. And honestly, I remember being as a kid just being like,
No! 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 No!
No! No, 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 no! No! What? No!
No!
there's that part at the end where Evil Lynn comes out there and fools her and is posing as her mother, and that even freaked me out more, just because thinking about, you know, somebody looking like your mother, that just freaked me out as a kid. One of the other things I like at the very end, it's kind of cheesy, but I still like it, is right before He-Man's able to pull his sword out of the deal, Skeletor gets his sword and puts it into his little whatever that is that he puts it into, and it turns him into Super Skeletor. It kind of looks like Strife from the X-Force from Marvel Comics, if you guys are into Marvel Comics and you probably know who Strife is. But, you know, he's like Super Skeletor or Skelestrife. You know, and the costumes, I mean, it's cheesy. It's so over the top and it's super golden, and I'd never seen anything like that in the cartoon. But it's still kind of fun to watch. You know, it's just the big dynamic third act of the film. And he actually says Masters of the Universe. Skeletor says it, you know, says the title of the film. I'm not sure how I feel about it when they do that in movies. One of the funny things that I just randomly remember about doing as a kid is the scene where they're all eating barbecue and Gwildor shoots the little grapple gun and gets that bucket of ribs out of the backseat of that car, the people making out. He's eating ribs, and obviously it's an animatronic face and everything. I didn't realize that as a kid, so I just thought that because he's sticking these whole ribs just in his mouth, and that's not how you eat ribs. But I didn't know that. I'd never really eaten ribs at that age, so I ordered ribs or tried to eat ribs like that. I don't know if I ordered them, but maybe my dad was cooking them at the house, and I just stuck the whole thing in, and I was like, what the? And now the ending, the ending I remember as a kid being kind of confused and being like, it's not real? Or is it real? Because she wakes up after all this stuff happens and this huge journey they just went on, or I say journey, they were all on Earth for the most part. They did go to Eternia. But then she wakes up and her parents are alive. Everything's just fine and dandy. She runs downstairs and her parents are acting like she's crazy. Like, what do you mean? We've been here the whole time. We just had to go on a business. We had the secret business trip thing or whatever. And then she runs outside and her boyfriend Kevin's out there, and then they start talking and hugging. And they're like, no, it was real. They're like remembering and hugging. It was real. I believe it. Do you remember? And
You know?
We were there.
so I'm not sure what to think. Was it real or wasn't it real? Because her parents are alive now, and her parents were dead to begin with. They never said anything about how He-Man can change the course of the history and change time. I mean, I don't know. That was kind of weird. But also another kind of fun thing about this is that it was one of the first movies to do a post-credit scene. Actually, this and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Literally after the entire credits, there is a post-credit scene where Skeletor comes out of this water in this whatever dungeon he fell down at the end, and he does the classic ripoff. Another ripoff this movie does is "I'll be back," and he's like comes up out of the water like that. But he does say "I'll be back."
I'll be back.
And it's a post-credit scene, so it goes black after that. What this movie clearly does in the beginning is rip off a lot of things. But the first thing it does is it rips off Superman, the 1978 film. I mean, it straight up rips it off to where you have the words and the credits like going towards the screen, and it's like bright letters. The music even sounds exactly the same. It's not John Williams, and it's not the same exact melody, but it does sound, it's the same tone. It's obviously inspired. They're trying as hard as they can to sound like the Superman theme without technically ripping it off. The only difference they make with the actual lettering going towards the screen is they add like some rainbow coloring to it. But other than that, it is a complete ripoff of the Superman 1978 movie. You know what? I still love it. It's nostalgic for me, and it reminds me of my childhood, and it did have a big impact on me, whether it was true to He-Man or not. So, hey, thanks for tuning in for that one, guys. I really appreciate it. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the like button, and send some comments below on the chat. Like I said, I want to start chatting with you guys. Send me any requests you would like me to do. I'd like to review some movies for you guys if y'all are interested. And we'll just see where it goes from there. And make sure you tune in for my next review, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from the 80s. Oh yeah! Well, hey guys, thanks again for joining me. And remember, when life gives you lemons, make some hot, fresh popcorn.